Feelings are a vital part of my life, but they are engendered by thought, not manufacturing thought.
Is there a way to balance both mind and heart when looking at the issue of morality? What do the naturalists have to say about that issue? And how do we know that Satan and evil exist? Join us today on Just Thinking as we return to Columbia University for a Q&A session with author and apologist Ravi Zacharias. Welcome back to Just Thinking, where today we're part of a Q&A forum Ravi held at Columbia University in New York City. The questions today have a similar theme, as both deal with questions of morality and good versus evil. Here's Ravi as he takes the first question.
When you were speaking about naturalism in the beginning, you used evidence talking about bin Laden or Hitler. Were your arguments appealing to our feelings of justice? If naturalism says that our feelings are really what morality is all about, were you not leading us to use our feelings against bin Laden or Hitler as ways of rejecting naturalism?
No, I never said naturalism says feelings are leading to morality. I never said that. I said it's biology. And if you are taking two things that may have one thing in common, but have a whole worldview different to it, you're committing a very significant logical fallacy of that's called the undistributed middle. Two things that have one thing in common may not have everything in common. Feelings are a vital part of my life, but they are engendered by thought, not manufacturing thought. So it is the thinking that engenders the feelings, and that chronological sequence. If the feeling alone engenders the thought, then your point would be well taken, but that's not what I'm arguing at all. I'm not at all using Hitler or bin Laden as feelings. The question is, if you don't feel anything after watching what Hitler did, I'd have some serious questions for you. Because there must be a logical connection between a thought and an emotional response. You do not bifurcate humanity that way. And if you did not have that connection, you'd be fragmented as a being. So yes, the feeling is an indicator, but you don't just push the feeling as that which adjudicates whether something is right or wrong. But the logic of no-ontic referent for morality leads me, in fact, to a feelingless world. I should not be feeling anything towards these people. Why am I even feeling it? It is purely then chemistry. So I'm not appealing to feeling. I'm taking the thought and showing where it feels, which is precisely the point I made on the cross too, that it is actual, embodiment, concrete. It is not merely an abstraction.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
When we equate sin to evil, is it as much of an institution as Christianity is? Or is sainted and evil an illusion created by man, and is it just us?
Yeah, well, fair enough question. When you say, is it just us, you have to answer the question, who is the us we're talking about? Is this a monolithic thing where we're all thinking the same thing, but we are all under an illusion of something else? Shankara, the great metaphysician of the Hindu worldview, the Advaita worldview, Shankara posited the theory of Maya, illusion. It's all really illusionary. Your sense of self is illusionary. And once when he was chased by an elephant and he ran up a tree, somebody asked him why, if it was an illusion, did he run? And he said, well, that was an illusionary elephant, my run was illusionary, and I ran up an illusionary tree. You cannot deny the reality of something by just saying, are we illusionarily looking at something so crass? All you need to do, my friend, is see one brutal murder and know it is not illusionary. If evil is illusionary, so is good. If good is illusionary, then why do anything good in this world? So I don't think it is us, because first of all, we are not united in what we consider evil. So A will disagree with B. And if A says to B, it is all just us, B would have to say that maybe your way of thinking is not my way of thinking. Then who arbitrates that? There is no way to do away with evil as illusion without doing away with any decent act as illusionary too, and making this world a complete repetition of meaningless acts.
In the Bible, there's a passage where a man comes to Christ. I can't remember the actual passage, where he talks about, I believe his son's demon-possessed, and he says to Christ, I believe, help me with my unbelief. And I guess my question for you is, how then, when it comes to pain and suffering and wanting and desires that have come unmet in one's life, how then does the believer, how can the believer exercise himself spiritually so as to remain faithful in the face of God's constant silence? Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure does. I hope my answer does too. That's a profound question, and it comes in different forms at different stages of the Scripture. The Apostle Paul, who was probably the most dramatically converted within the New Testament and then ended up writing a third of the New Testament, he was a Hebrew by birth, a citizen of Rome, studied in a Greek city. He knew his culture through and through. He says at one point in the book of Romans, that which I want to do, I don't. He sees this tension within himself as a conflict between death and life. And the image he actually uses is, in those days, the punishment for murder was to carry the dead body on your back. It cut down murders quite quickly, because you would have to carry that corpse on your back. Talk about dead weight. And, putting that on your back and carrying it. And he says, this divided heart of mine is like carrying a dead body. I'm unable to do what I want to do. And the person also said, Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief. I frankly think it's a graphic illustration of your heart and mine. There's a beautiful essay I read by an Englishman years ago called Hidden Gold, about a woman who got into the tram and she was looking for money and couldn't find it to pay for her ticket. And she said, I know I had some. And then suddenly, in one little pocket, found a sovereign, and she was able to pay with it. He said, life is like that mysterious purse. At a moment where we don't think we have it, we suddenly find something in a pocket that we never knew was even there. And he says that's the kind of faith that some people have. At the last minute, we find we had an ounce of faith that we never thought we ever had before, and it comes through at just the right time. Let me give you an illustration of my father-in-law who passed away last September. He was a brilliant man, an author, chemical engineer, authored some books. He was possibly the most disciplined man I knew in my life personally. Incredibly meticulous, well organized, through and through. But he was a very great realist. And he was a man devoted to Christ, but always had questions. In June of last year, he found out he had cancer with a growing tumor, and it rocked him to his feet. He struggled and struggled and struggled. Faith never came easy to him. But he was a man of faith. And he questioned, and he and I talked. He talked to the doctors, he talked to ministers. He and I talked for about 3 hours. He had so many fears, with a deep heart of faith still hanging in there. On the last day of his life, I was flying into Toronto to see him. My wife, Margie, was already there. I already spent some time, but I was speaking elsewhere. And she phoned and said he may not make it. So I got into the plane again. He had his daughters standing around him. He'd been married for 63 years. Gradually, the hallucination type thing began and so on. He started to rip his clothes off. My wife said it was a pathetic thing to see a man of such dignity. But then there was a calmness that came upon him. He sat up in bed, put his arms out towards his wife. There was no sound in his voice left. He just lipped the words, I love you. 63 years of married life. He said, I love you. He put his head back on his pillow, and he looked to the ceiling, and this was the last word he uttered. Amazing. Amazing. And he was gone. I don't know what exactly was going on, but I strongly suggest a man who struggled with his faith was given the last affirmation that what awaited him was more amazing than what he had ever imagined. Don't despair when you struggle with your questions, but like C.S. Lewis says, you don't take 10 steps back, you take 1 step back to deal with that issue. I think I could not be an atheist. I don't have that much of faith. It takes too much to disbelieve. I just cannot, and I'm not being funny, I'm being very serious. Because sometimes you think it might relieve you of an awful lot, but it doesn't. It brings a baggage all its own that you cannot explain and understand. So yes, you will struggle. There are times you'll be saying, Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief. But when you really know Him, you'll walk with Him, and you will find that relationship carries you through to the next step. When the answer was not propositional, the relationship carried you through. I read the greatest sermon ever preached on the prodigal son by a Scotsman. I think it's the greatest sermon on the prodigal son. It had 3 points. First one was sick of home. Second point, homesick. Third point, home. Sick of home, homesick, and home. When you wander into the terrain of doubt, there are no answers in there either. And then you come back home to where Christ has you, and you say, I believe, because here somehow the picture is complete, even if there are 1 or 2 things missing. For the Christian, joy is fundamental, sorrow is peripheral. Because the fundamental questions are answered, the peripheral ones are not. For the unbelieving person, sorrow is central and joy is peripheral. Because the fundamental questions are unanswered, only some peripheral ones are answered. So the joy is peripheral, sorrow is fundamental for the unbeliever. Here, he says, I believe, help my unbelief. I think the fundamental ones are answered, the peripheral ones not.